Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline. Take my hand and come with me, darling.
Hello and welcome to the Nature Garden podcast with me, Carl Steinson, and the weekending show team from Lionheart Radio. In this episode, the holly and the ivy, and folklore and mistletoe, and more with Tom Pattinson. Tom Cadwallender's charting the rise in popularity at Christmas of robins and turkeys. And Steve Lowe's on a wonderful early winter stroll in the countryside. Plus some top tips for the garden from Tom Pattinson. All coming up on the Nature Garden podcast.
The gulls come trailing by. There's many a mile of clean deserted sand. The land goes on one. Nighttime slips soon, like an hour passing by. The deep seas heave and the gulls come trailing by.
It's been quite a transition to winter here in Northumberland when Storm Arwen reminded us of the power of Mother Nature. Despite all our modern gadgets, many of us were without power and struggling to keep warm. It all seemed very much like the olden days at times, and looking back to ancient times, we know that societies have found ways to make winter brighter, and Tom's doing just that, while grappling with the loss of the odd berry here and there, aren't you, Tom? Uh-oh.
I've just been into the garden to pick one or two sprigs of holly, berried holly, to decorate behind one or two paintings we have hanging in the house, and a mirror perhaps. I've been disappointed though, because in November they were laden, the two trees I have, with berries. Now they've been stripped. The birds have taken them, blackbirds in particular. You can't really celebrate with hollies without berries, but I'll just have to try. I can just imagine, way back in time, the time of the Druids, before the Romans even arrived here, the darkness and the dead plant materials all around them, going into winter, around the winter solstice time. I can see them seizing on to anything in their imagination that looked lively and looked bright and looked to be living. One of the reasons why they chose holly, no doubt, along with other evergreens, the ivy, mistletoe, anything that had greenery on it, which reflected living things and life. So the Romans used it as well, of course, when they came. And it's a proud history, holly has. They worshipped the gods, and two of the gods they worshipped were Jupiter, the planet, and of course Saturn, the planet. And they had a celebration at the winter solstice called Saturnalia, in which they exchanged gifts of bunches of holly and other little presents, just as we do today, actually. Nothing new with winter solstice or Christmas presents. And then the Christians, you can imagine them early in the occupation, the few hundred years occupation in this country of the Romans. You can imagine the Christians seeing these berries and thinking that was Christ's blood. And the thorns, and thinking of the crown of thorns. And the evergreen leaves, and thinking about life after death, life everlasting. I'm proud to put a bit of holly up, given those traditions. But I can't always get berries on them. You can't always get berries on them. You have to choose a plant which produces berries, you see, because hollies can be male or female. The male hollies, you can check their flowers in May or June when they flower in the United Kingdom. Check the flowers with a hand lens. You'll see if there's just a stamen or stamens, that's the filament and anther, the male parts, and no pistil, that's the female part in the middle, then it's never going to have berries. It's a male. If you see a pistil in the middle, that's the stigma, style and ovary, the female reproductive part in the middle of the flower, then you'll know there's hope of having berries. And even if there's no stamen there to fertilise it, other hollies in the area will be visited by pollinating insects, transfer it, and you get fruits. You know, there are even some hollies which have male and female flowers. Hooray, which is normal for a flower. No male and female flower pods, that is. And one of my favourites is called J.C. Van Tol. It has lovely smooth leaves, green, evergreen, no prickles at all, and it gives beautiful bunches of berries every single year. Two I have in the garden, they're both female varieties. One is Ilex aquifolium, it's a green leaf, English holly so called, and it has really seriously vicious leaves, so you've got to be careful with the prickles, the thorns on them, but it also gives beautiful bunches of berries. That is until the blackbirds gobble them up. The other one I have is a silver variegated variety. It's called Ilex Argentea marginata. Argentea means silver, of course, and marginata tells you that the silver or the whitish colour is on the periphery or the edge, the margins of those evergreen central leaves. Those two are good. There's one I'd love to have in the garden, but unfortunately it's a male variety. It's called Ferox, F-E-R-O-X, and Ferox variegata is a beauty, but it has crisscrossed spines, thorns all over those leaves. Beautiful to look at, and no berries because it's a male. The final one I like to see is a dwarf variety. It's called Ilex crenata. It's used for hedging, ideal for a rock garden, or hedging around a bed of flowers, etc. It's sometimes used as a substitute for buxus, the box, which suffers from box blight these days. Sometimes you have to take the box blight out, replace it with something like Ilex crenata.
Christmas is a time for birds to take centre stage on decorations and cards and dinner tables for some of us. And Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology is looking at the festive roots of the robin and the turkey.
Since Storm Arwen ravaged the northeast coast, as well as many other areas at the end of November and the beginning of December, we've kind of slipped into a benign weather phase, and it looks as if it's going to continue right through till Christmas. Now, that's really good news for the birds that have come here for the winter. You know, hundreds of thousands of birds pile into the UK every autumn to spend their winters here. You know, there's thrushes, there's finches, there's wading birds, ducks and geese and swans and all sorts of things. And they're coming from an awful long way north, really, to spend their winter here. And they've travelled for thousands and thousands of miles. So really, if we have a fairly kind of benign winter, it's got to be in their favour. So hopefully that's going to be the case, at least for the first half anyway, first half of the winter. But it's not those sorts of birds that we associate with Christmas. There are two other species, and quite contrasting species as well. The first one is the robin, and the robin redbreast, and it's not really red, you know, that redbreast, and it's more of an orangey sort of reddy sort of colour, with a kind of a browny back and a bit of grey around the head, pointy bill, which suggests it's an insectivorous bird. But that bird kind of has become part and parcel of our Christmases since Victorian times, when it was first depicted on a snowy scene on a Victorian Christmas card back a couple of hundred years ago. It's kind of just been locked in our psyche as a bird that kind of just is always going to be there, and we always think of it as being there as well. But actually, it's got quite an interesting history, because in the breeding season we don't actually see that many robins. And robins that we have, it's a population which is a partial migrant population. But the ones that breed in the UK stay in the UK. But yeah, in the summertime, they tend to disappear back into the woods, and we don't see them very much because they're away secretly breeding. And it comes at this time of year, and they're coming out, and they'll come into our gardens, they'll come into our parks, and we'll see them quite readily. And who could forget the picture of a robin sitting on a spade handle in the garden? It's just really quite amazing actually when you think about it. They'll come they'll feed off our hands, and they'll do all sorts of things. But they are quite secretive during the breeding season. But they're very, very approachable in the winter time, and really they're quite aggressive as well. They will hold territories, and they will fight almost to the death. In fact, sometimes they will fight to the death. And interestingly, females can adopt male criteria, characteristics, and some of the gametes will become sort of male orientated. It's quite interesting, and they'll become quite aggressive. And there was some fabulous work carried out by David Lack back in the 1950s, and he produced it in a book of the Private Life of a Robin, and it really showed how aggressive they are. He kind of used mirrors in their territories, and they would attack mirror. They would see the reflection and they would attack. They really would. And it's kind of crazy. We have this image of the robin redbreast being so friendly and kind of really quite nice, and sort of depicting this bucolic image of kind of rural England. It's not entirely like that at all. And we do get robins coming across from continental Europe for the winter time, and those ones are kind of have slightly different characteristics. They're slightly more grey around their heads, and they have different habits, but they will come into our gardens just the same. It's quite interesting that. And the other bird that we kind of associate with Christmas, of course, is the turkey. And the turkey is a very, very popular lunch feature. And interestingly, actually, it's not a native to Europe. Actually, the wild turkey, it's come from the Americas, particularly in northern and central America, and they were brought across back in the must be in the 14th and 15th century, after the early settlers and the early explorers, and they were brought into Africa, then into the Middle East, where they were farmed. And it wasn't until the 400 or 500 years ago that they were brought into the UK, and I think possibly that's where the name turkey came from, because people thought they were originating in Turkey, but actually they originated in North America, brought across and farmed in the Middle East and Turkey, then brought into the UK that way. And but there's some great tales of how the early kind of turkey farmers back in the 17th and 18th century were growing herds of these birds, and in Norfolk and Suffolk and so forth, and they would walk them into London, into the poultry markets in London, even to the point where they would have little shoes made for them so they wouldn't hurt their feet, and they could manage all their way. And they would be feeding on the way, just like sort of, they would take cattle into the market as well. So it's quite an interesting sort of thought that this bird, which is kind of travelled from North America around by the Middle East, has become really quite an important feature of our Christmas day, of our Christmas lunch. And it is just the one of the most important things. Interestingly, again, in North America, where this bird originates, it's generally not eaten on Christmas Day. It's more of a Thanksgiving bird. So it's kind of how our traditions have developed in a slightly different way. It's absolutely fantastic, really fascinating, really. How these things have worked. But yes, there's an awful lot of things going on in the avian world which kind of relate right back to our Christmas tales and Christmas stories. So if you want to help wild birds in the winter time, just put a bit of food out, and most importantly, put some water out, believe it or not. That would be really helpful. And if you're having turkey this Christmas, please enjoy it, and think about the robin redbreast, and give a bit of food out to the robin as well. He'll really enjoy it, or they will really enjoy it. So, Merry Christmas, folks, and hopefully we'll catch you in the new year. Bye-bye.
If you're feeling Christmassy and fancy growing a holly and some ivy, you might be surprised at the number of varieties. So let's join Tom, who's looking at some of the options, and he's waiting patiently under the mistletoe to tell us more.
I was talking about hollies in the earlier piece, and believe it or not, there are over 400 different species of holly to choose from, and assuming most of those species have several cultivars, varieties, there's a heck of a big choice out there. But the reality is, when you go to the garden centre or nursery, there'll just be a handful of types to choose from. One little thing to bear in mind, there's one called Golden King. It's actually a female. It will produce berries. There's another called Golden Queen. It's actually a male and will not produce berries. Silver Queen, silver variegated one, is also a male. No berries there either. So just remember those small things. Let's move on to the ivies. When I take tours around the Annick Garden, Poison Garden in Northumberland, and people will see the ivy there, the ivy tunnels we walk through, and they'll say, it's poison ivy. And I say, no, it's ivy which is poisonous. Poison ivy is a totally different plant, the one we read about affecting people with an allergic reaction in the United States of America. I remember a song from the 60s perhaps, Poison Ivy, a pop song based on that, I guess. Our ivy, UK ivy, is Hedera helix, a different plant altogether. It is also poisonous. The fruits, it's actually poisonous. The fruits of it are poisonous to us. Eat some of those and your digestive system will suffer severely. Let's leave it at that. If you handle the leaves a lot, you may well be subject to an allergic reaction of common ivy leaves, Hedera helix that is. Apart from that, it's a bit of a nuisance in certain parts of my garden. Unfortunately, it creeps around the bottom of the hedge and tries to get up through the hedge. And quite recently, when the storm arrived, Storm Arwen, it had crept up on a neighbour's prunus tree, flowering cherry, and it had taken over the whole of the canopy. And being evergreen, it was top heavy. When the storm came, the wind, the rain, it broke off the whole of the top of that tree. So keep ivy under control. There's some beautiful varieties, of course. I like the one that's called Sulphur Heart. It's a vigorous one, climbs up outdoors, hardy outdoors. It's also called Paddy's Pride. It's large leaves, a mixture of green and creamy yellow. It's a beauty. But there are lots and lots. There are just 11 different species of ivy, well, barely a dozen. But there are lots of cultivars, varieties come from it. And many of these are used in containers, outdoors over winter in this country, and lots of them are used as pot plants indoors. And one of my little favourites, it always has been, is Hedera helix Little Diamond. A beautiful little pot plant, grey-green leaves, creamy white margin. So, ivy is part of the Christmas scene as well, so of course I'm going to handle it with gloves on, of course. I'm not going to take any chances. It's just near just under the hand there, the wrist. That's a very tender area, and if I'm going to have an allergic reaction from a plant, that's where it will hit me. So, the ivy joins us indoors. There's plenty of that in the garden at the moment. Now the other one, the third one in my estimation that should be in there if it's Christmas time, is mistletoe. A botanical name is Viscum album, and a couple of years ago in a local pub quiz, one of the questions was, what does Viscum album give you an opportunity to steal? And of course the answer was a kiss, because everyone looks forward to that under the mistletoe, don't they? It grows as a parasite on certain trees. The two main trees in this country are apple and hawthorn. That hawthorn is the crataegus. You can propagate it yourself. It's a long wait until it germinates and grows, of course, by cutting in a mature branch or stem of hawthorn or an apple tree, getting the seeds, the sticky seeds, and cutting a little bit into the bark and pushing it in under the bark. It happens naturally when birds feed on mistletoe, which they do. It's a sticky seed. It sticks to their beak. They go to a branch and they rub their beak on the branch. It dislodges the seed, which goes into a crevice, and months later, a mistletoe appears. Holly, ivy, mistletoe.
Steve Lowe from the Northumberland Rivers Trust has been out and about enjoying some early winter walks and observing how nature is recovering after the storms that hit us as autumn departed with an almighty bang.
Well, it's not such a bad day after all the bad weather we've had with Storm Arwen and whatever came next, which I think was Storm Barra, although Storm Barra wasn't quite so bad. But I'm here today looking at some of the storm damage that we've had, and I'm on the Brunton Burn near Flodden, and well, firstly the rivers are obviously running quite high at the moment, and then there's an awful lot of silt coming down, but there's an amazing amount of just wreckage in the watercourses, to be honest with you. I mean, the site I'm on at the moment, the lads have just finished with their clearing. The whole of the road here has been totally covered with fallen trees. Most of them are plantation trees. They're of a fair size and they don't have much of a root plate, so they've fallen over in the bad weather with the winds and everything. But a number of them are also broadleaf trees like elm, etc. Now, if those have come down and they're not a danger, I think they're probably best left, to be honest with you, because it just allows a number of things to come back in. But in the watercourses, a number of them are totally choked, to be honest. Now, wood in watercourse is not a bad thing in itself anyway, because it does actually act to create a little bit of, habitat, and there's a tractor going past there, and also areas of still water. So the bank I'm looking at, for instance, has had a tree pulled out, the root plates come with it, the tree's lodged in the river. Behind where the root plate was is starting to erode, but where the branches are, it's started to deposit as well. So it's a bit of catch-22 really. And the other good thing at this time of year, though, having said that, is you can actually see where all the animals have been gone through the river. So I've got a nice little sandy beach here, and I can see footprints of road here, and then there's what looks like rat probably, but also lovely, well preserved down on the riverbank. There is a fantastic otter footprint. Listen to that slush. It's not my stomach, it's just a river. It's like making a nice gurgle, slush. Well, that was nice to see the otter footprint. Anyway, I'm venturing a bit further into the woodland now, along the watercourse, and there's still similar signs of devastation. What's interesting though is this time of year is how stark things like holly are, and you can see it's quite well dispersed in this woodland, and some of it's even got berries on. And it's brilliant. I love holly. It's a fantastic tree in itself, but you don't often get them like this one. There's two, and one's a female and one's a male. They're right next door to each other, which is great. And also there's a bit of ivy there, just to keep the Christmas theme going. But what I've noticed is every place I've been today, and this is my fifth site visit today, I've heard great spotted woodpeckers, and they're obviously at this time of year easier to see because there's less leaves on the trees. But it's fantastic to see quite so many of them or here anyway, quite so many of them. Of course, you've got things like mistle thrush, which I particularly like. Mistle thrush, beautiful birds, and your long-tailed tits and things like that. But apart from that, I've not, to be honest, seen an awful lot today. It's the usual woodland birds. Oh, and plenty of robins, of course. Robins basically following us around everywhere I go, which is nice. But, woodlands at this time of year, they're all very, very different. And definitely worth a little wander around. But I think for me, it's actually keeping your ears open. That's the most important part of it. Well, you can hear the drone of chainsaws in the background, which is not surprising given the storm. But we've also got quite a few Scots pines here, and unfortunately, one of the things I noticed earlier was a grey squirrel, which is bad news, obviously. But, they're here, so there's not much more to say about that, really. But in this woodland, there's probably going to be tree creeper. There's going to be deer as well. And you often see deer. I mean, it's a bit late in the day now for me. To be honest, it's starting to go dark even. And just keeping your eyes open. In fact, there's a deer right now, just running across the field to the left of me. It's seen us. It's stopped. It's looking at us. Yep, he's going to carry on though, but he'll go in the opposite direction to what he was doing now. And there's his tail, his white tail, or the bum. So that's a roe deer. It looks like a female from here. She's away down into a little bit of woodland. A little bit of willow woodland down by the river. And there's pheasants everywhere as well. That's the other thing at this time of year, because they're still being shot, so no surprise really. But anyway, get yourself out in the woodlands even after the storm. The only thing is keep your eyes on the trees above you, not just where you're going, because the odd branch is hung up. Go on, canny.
Here's Tom with some things to be getting on with in the garden.
And so it's jobs for the week time. And I'm busy every morning at the moment, have been for the past 3 weeks, doing an inspection, walking around the garden, because we've had frost overnight. It's been down to -2 Celsius. I have an outdoor maximum minimum thermometer which measures the temperature overnight, and I keep an eye on that. There's not been anything seriously frosted. But there are some plants out there that just on the periphery between being hardy and being a bit frost tender. I keep an eye on those. If they're nipped by frost, which indeed a Hebe, a Veronica, was about 2 or 3 years ago, really blackened the tops, I just prune it immediately down to the clearest, the next green shoots coming lower down. If you don't prune it out immediately, it will cause dieback, and that will go down through the plant gradually, and you don't want that. So keep an eye on that thing every morning. Also at the moment, I left some of the soft fruits, the red currant, the black currant especially, and the gooseberry. I left them earlier because they do need a bit of pruning every year. They get congested at the centre, but you can't see that congestion clearly when they've still got the leaves on. So deciduous plants, deciduous fruits, you can see them now, and I can get into the heart of them. Prune out all the little, the thin shoots which are going nowhere, not doing anything, just congesting the centre, and prune out any other wood that needs to be done. And the same applies to ornamental shrubs as well. A few weeks ago, when the Weigela, variegated Weigela, Florida variegata, when it was covered in leaves, I knew it was a thicket in the middle, but I'd wait patiently. Now I see straight through the whole of the shrub. I can get into the heart of it, cut some of the weak stems way down to the base, and top the other ones which will flower next year. They'll flower on the new wood next year. So that's another job to be doing at the moment. While I'm on pruning, any apple trees you have, you can start pruning now. Especially a frosty morning is good, because you can get onto the soil, onto the land next to them, and your feet don't sink down into the mud. So it's a good opportunity when it's a slightly frosty morning. Cutting back, some of them were summer prunes, some of my apple trees, all the laterals, that's the side shoots coming out, just beyond any fruits they had. I cut them back to just close to the fruits, to probably about something like 15 to 20 centimetres. Now I can shorten them completely and get back to those short spurs which I grow my apple trees on. So that's a job to be getting on with at the moment. I certainly don't touch the plum at this time of year, because I don't want silver leaf disease to gain entry. That's something to prune May or June next year, which is the worst time to accept, because it generally has young plums on. Anyway, leave that. Don't prune it during the frost. Moving on from the pruning, it's not too early to plan for next year. I'm doing a lot of planning for next year, and the big one for me is the seed order. Do you remember about 18 months, 2 years ago, when we first heard about this pandemic? It was in the spring of the year, and some people leave their buying their seeds for the season, the vegetable seeds, some of the flower seeds, until April, May period. Well, and the seed firms were overrun. Well, Thomas by name and Thomas by nature, I like to have the seeds to hand as quickly as possible. If you haven't made a seed order yet, or visited the seed area in the garden centre, then I'd do so now, just in case we're a bit confined to barracks, so to speak, next year in the spring. Certainly hope not. I'm looking inside the greenhouse as well. This is the ideal opportunity to get the thing cleaned out. Get the shelves disinfected down, just a basic disinfectant, just to clean them, brush them down first. And any trays, seed trays and pots that you have there that have been used and haven't been washed yet, cleanliness is next to godliness. You don't want to spread any pests or diseases which may be overwintering on those receptacles, the pots and the trays. So clean those as well. I'm also in the garage. I have a lot of fruit in store, apples especially, in a tall tower with shelves, and the fragrance coming from those ripe fruits at the moment. And if you've got those, or you've got potatoes, anything like that, inspect them occasionally during the week, for goodness sake. One bad apple can ruin the barrel, can't it? Whatever you're doing this coming week, enjoy your gardening.
You've been listening to Gardener Tom Pattinson, birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology, and Steve Lowe from the Northumberland Rivers Trust. I'm Carl Steinson, and don't forget you can listen back to all the previous reports we've done on the Nature Garden podcast. That's the Nature Garden podcast. And enjoy your gardening and time outdoors with nature, and we all wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Bye for now.